Welcome back. Well, I think there are some questions.
Yes, there are. But first, someone made a beautiful remark. She wrote, coincidentally, today I found an appropriate text from Lao Tzu. I treat well those who are good. I also treat well those who are not good, because that is how you achieve goodness. I'm honest with those who are honest. I'm also honest with those who are not honest, because that is how you achieve honesty.
Well, that's in a nutshell what I tried to say as well. I needed 20-25 minutes, and Lao Tzu did it in just a few words, but that's really the thing I want to say as well. So, Lao Tzu was for sure a theosophist with a big capital letter, yeah? Thank you.
Then I'll do one of the questions. A feeling of not liking someone is not so easy to put aside. So what is wisdom in dealing with that person?
Yeah, I can imagine if you had a history with that person and he had played some tricks with you or whatever. Well, if you are not able to be good for somebody who is not good, like Lao Tzu said, well, at least try a neutral attitude. And if you are not able to think positively, with compassion, with love, about a person, well, don't think about the person at all. And now take another thought, a thought of love towards somebody you do love. Or think about some beautiful thing. But don't linger on hate. That's the problem. Because then you get an even closer attraction, a relationship based on negativity. And one day that will have its karmic consequences. So it's difficult. So nobody wants you to do something which is impossible, because it is possible to love somebody who is not good, like Lao Tzu said. But if you feel that the time being you are not able to do it, well, think other thoughts. There's so many beautiful thoughts. There's so many people I'm sure you do love, and I think nice, beautiful thoughts, loving thoughts about the things you do love.
Beautiful. What if we change our attitude in a not quite good relationship, but the other side doesn't? Is that still a good start?
Yes, yes. I repeat what Lao Tzu said, be good to the good and be good to those who are not good. There was a quote from one of our leaders, Dr. Gottfried de Perukter, who said that love, impersonal love, pure compassion will warm even the coldest heart. So it's not easy, but if you really have that image of, the oneness of all beings, and you see in every body, in every living being, a brother, brotherhood is a fact, it will become easier to treat and think nicely and lovingly and with compassion about all those who are not so nice and not so good. It doesn't help to think negatively about them. It doesn't help with revenge or that kind of thing. We will talk about that in part 3. And for sure, not on the short term, you will change somebody if you think nice about them, but on the long term, it will have its effect, for sure.
Another question. When our thoughts leave an impression on the other, how can it be that that impression is sometimes received in the opposite way?
Well, that's because personality stands in front of another personality. Yeah, if we are working with nature, that wouldn't happen. But because most of us live in our personality, in a sense of separation, and we think that we have nothing to do with the other, we are separated from the other, and kind of isolation, then you place yourself in your mind and in your thoughts and in your attitude, yeah, in front of, in opposite of the other. And then you get the situation that you think bad about the other and the other think bad about you. And then you get that terrible eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But the moment one of those two, and that was in fact the question before, one of the two changes his attitude and stops thinking badly about that other person, you know, there is no possibility for the other to go on, because the other is impersonal now, yeah, and the reaction will stop, you know, the negativity will stop. So in our current days, I repeat, personality stands against another personality, and that's the way we live today, and that's why we have war, and that's why we have so much quarrel and so much enmity and so much trouble. But the moment we see each other as a friend, as a brother, as a part of the same web of life, it stops. Then we work on with nature.
And another question. You talked in your lecture about sympathy, love, antipathy, hate. So that sounds like emotions, personal attractions. And you said if you're neutral to people, you don't have strong attraction. But isn't it possible to be very curious to people you are neutral to?
Now, neutral for me, I don't mean impersonal. Neutral for me is that you are not interested in somebody. So neutral is a good attitude if there are two parties, two war parties, and you don't choose one party. Now you are neutral. That's okay. But the neutrality I was speaking of is that you simply don't have any kind of attraction to somebody. For instance, if you don't know and don't like football at all, and somebody comes to you and said, well, that team has won, well, I'm not interested. Yeah, you forget it immediately. Yeah, if you are interested in, let's say, politics or in astronomy, and somebody comes and says, well, you have seen the new picture of the Milky Way, then you are interested in. Or you hate astronomy, then you get the same relationship with that person, because that guy always talks about stars, I'm not interested in, yeah. But in fact you have a negative attraction. But neutral, you don't have any attraction to somebody. I think that it is almost impossible to be totally neutral to somebody, because there's always something in the other that resonates with your own consciousness. Because if there was nothing in the other person that resonates with your consciousness, you would simply not have met him or her. Because the attraction is there, but it is a very low-grade attraction.
And I've still one other, it's more a remark, not a question, experience. The mental atmosphere in which we reside is certainly important. Today, at the exhibition of human rights activist I.S.I.S, it was very quiet. The subjects were quite impressive. People were made to think. That's how the thinking atmosphere can influence people.
Oh yeah, I'm going to talk about that in part 2. About the mental sphere of planet Earth. Yes, the mental sphere is very important, and I'm not going to say much about it because I'm going to... Yeah? Okay, well, that's... Okay. Well, let's go on with part 2. Group karma, it's titled. Well, before the break we told you that irritation can build up an individual person, eventually causing an outburst of violence. But this can also happen in groups of people. In fact, there is such a thing that we call group karma, collective karma. And what do we mean by that? Well, we told you before about attraction, by which human beings, in fact all beings, are attracted to each other, the grand web of destiny, the living organism, which is our solar system, the egg of Brahma, it's called in India. And that egg of Brahma consists of myriads of beings, gods, humans, animals, plants, you name it, all attracted to each other. All have a certain characteristic that makes them part of this egg of Brahma, this solar system, our solar system, and not one of the billions of other suns in the Milky Way, one of the other billions of eggs of Brahma. And because collectively, as a great organism, they live and they act and interact and thus make karma, they all contribute to the karma of our solar system. Now an atom in my left little finger will only contribute in a very, very tiny part of the whole. Nevertheless, it is a part of it. If it had a different characteristic, it would be attracted not to this living organism, but to another. Well, of course, this is almost incomprehensible for us, as grand and as abstract as it may be. But if you translate it into smaller context, you see exactly the same thing. So all the inhabitants of a country have a certain characteristic which makes them attracted to each other and collectively form a nation. And as we said before the break, that attraction can come from love. You love your country, your culture, the national customs, as well from hate. You really hate everything your country has to offer. Now those people who hate their country are not likely to leave it. And that sounds strange, but it seems as if they need their country so they can curse at it. It's more likely that those who have a neutral attitude toward it, but who are attracted to another culture, that they leave their country. In any case, all those people born in a country or who have moved there through immigration, they form a group. And their thoughts and actions are common sown causes that will lead to consequences which all we have to reap as well. The whole nation will reap. In this context, we speak of group karma. And you cannot conceive of such a group as if it were one being with a soul. There is no group soul, it's an association. There is a number of people who have united and are sowing causes and reaping consequences together. Compare it with a football team that consists of players, a coach, the fans, and maybe more people, all people with their individual karma. But as a team, they collectively win or lose a game. That is the karma of their team. In this way, a country is a team, a group, and there is national karma. And in a smaller context, this applies to a city. Every city in a country has a characteristic, the characteristic of the country, of course, but also its own specific characteristic. And in even smaller context, you can see that each neighborhood of a city has a particular characteristic that makes it stand out from other neighborhoods in the city, and each family in such a neighborhood is a certain entity consisting of people who also collectively have a characteristic and as a family saw certain causes and reap consequences. And of course, all these people individually have their own character, their own individuality. They create their own causes and will reap their specific consequences, but that will also take place in a group. Karma is cause and effect, and the consequences will always be delivered, so to speak, by others. Separation does not exist. Karma exists because there is a living organism, which we called the web of destiny in the previous lecture, and every human being, yes, every being is a web within that universal web. Your thoughts and actions are always related to others responding to you, and you respond back. And thus, as a group, you collectively create your karma, group karma. Now, the fact that the group consists of people with different characteristics is no problem at all. On the contrary, that's what makes life interesting and colorful. If everyone were the same, it would be a boring place. Just because there are different people in a group, there may be harmony. We complement each other. Some lack skills that others have. Such a group can be a wonderful, dynamic whole. The problem arises when people consider their own characteristics more important than those of others. And that happens, for example, when people look down on certain habits of others, or when they think that their own religion is the only true one. And if that happens within the borders of a country, an imbalance arises in that country. And that imbalance may exist for many years, but it must one day lead to consequences. More and more karmic causes are built up, fueled by the idea of superiority and contempt toward others. And that other group feels insulted, thinks thoughts of hate against the oppressors, and at some point the bomb bursts and there may be a violent revolution. And this equally is true for different countries, for different nations. And there is another important aspect to consider. In fact, everything that lives on Earth is part of the web of destiny of our planet Earth, the life of the Earth, the living organism that is our planet. Each kingdom of nature has a special function to perform in that organism. And we humans, thinking beings endowed with self-awareness, that is, with the ability to make choices, constitute what you can call the mental sphere of the Earth. That mental sphere is composed of the thoughts we think. In our last talk we briefly mentioned that thoughts are living energies, and those living mental energies make up an atmosphere on our planet, as much as they, in smaller contexts, make up an atmosphere in a city or a family or in a home. We all know that. You enter a house and it feels good, or it feels bad. How does that come about? It's because of the decor, of the painting on the wall, or the comfortable sofa. No, those things may be able to contribute to it, but it comes mainly from the thoughts and from the feelings of the people who live there. They create an atmosphere, a mental atmosphere. Well, all human beings perform a function in the living organism Earth, just as each of the organs in the human body has a function. Without our lungs or our heart or brain or kidney, etc., we could not live as a manifested being. Each organ plays its role, has its specific function. So we, as humanity, have a specific function in the living Earth. And our function is that we form the mental atmosphere of the Earth. And that mental sphere functions only properly if all human beings, with their own individual characteristics, do not oppose those with different characteristics. Have you ever been in an environment where there was a recent quarrel? Did you also feel a very nasty, unpleasant atmosphere at that time? In our world, just about everyone argues with everyone else. And why is that necessary? Let's face it, we have much more in common with the other than that what makes us different from the other. We are much more interconnected than what separates us. We are all human beings, we are all thinkers, we are moving toward the same call to develop further as human beings, to awaken the latent, still dormant characteristics in us. Those national or cultural differences are there, for sure. We have our individual characteristics, but they are not essential. If human beings are hostile to each other because they believe that others are preventing them from satisfying their selfish desires, humanity is failing in its functioning within the larger scheme of planetary life. So it is not the planet that causes the imbalance, it's humanity. It's the way the majority of humanity thinks. The tension field of aggression and hatred fueled by millions is growing stronger and becomes more influential. It presses with increasing force on the emotional nature of man. As in an individual case, what I told you before the break, this pressure can become so great that populations can no longer control the emotions and the thoughts that are dominant within certain nations, and there will be a release, and that release means physical violence and physical war. The release of accumulated, uncontrolled selfish desires and emotions always takes place where the greatest imbalance is. Just as the physical human being often has a weak spot, so does humanity. And these weaknesses are created by the common power of thought and the mental imbalance created as a result. Regions where people live with different nationalistic or religious feelings which are opposed to people with other nationalistic or religious feelings are the weak spots of living planet Earth. They are therefore the most vulnerable and prone to outbreaks of violence. We saw this taking place in Eastern Europe, and it has been the case for more than 70 years, maybe more, in the Middle East, in the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. If both warring parties knew something about the doctrine of karma, their policies and their efforts to achieve their ideal would be on a totally different basis. We said it before. We choose our friends and enemies. Every Palestinian killed or every Israeli killed forges the bond between these two peoples, just makes that bond closer and closer. It's an illusion to suppose that you eradicate your enemy by killing him. You will undoubtedly meet him again in the next life, and the hatred between you and your enemies would only have increased because you killed him in the previous life. And the sad thing is that the doctrine of karma is found in both Islam and in the Jewish religion. Indeed, the so cruel eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth does not mean in its esoteric sense, mind you, in its esoteric sense, that you should kill someone because someone killed one of yours. No, it's a reference to the inescapable karmic law. To put it in another way, whoever takes up the sword will perish by the sword, according to Matthew in the Bible. Also in the Quran you will find plenty of indications about reincarnation and karma, and therefore there have always been Muslims who assumed karma. It is because of a great ignorance about karma that in conflict situations those who are winning always have the feeling that their revenge is satisfied, while those who have been defeated cry out for revenge. One wants retribution for the harm done. However, karma is a neutral law. You've said it a few times already. Karma knows no punishment or reward, let alone revenge. And when you think of revenge, do not immediately think of those terrible bombings and the destructions of entire cities of the enemy. Revenge begins small. When you are cut in traffic by a motorist, for example, and you want to cut him off in your turn, even if you only think such thoughts, there is already a kind of revenge. And hopefully you have the mastery not to turn those feelings of revenge into action, but much, much better it would be if the whole idea of revenge was unknown to you. Even if you have been wronged, don't linger on in a negative feeling. It pollutes the mental atmosphere even more. Forgiveness purifies. More about that in the third part of this talk. Unfortunately, the conflict in the Middle East and Eastern Europe are not the only examples of revenge, of aggression, of strife and war. In Africa and elsewhere, there is violence, there is war, and groups of people are hostile to each other. We are living in troubled times, and those times too are karmically determined. You can speak of a time of transition. Old thoughts die off and new thoughts are born. This has everything to do with the fact that people are born and die in groups. And this makes sense, of course, because if group karma is created, then the group that sought those causes must also collectively reap the consequences. So after a long rest, which we call death, this group collectively reincarnates and a new era begins. You also cannot separate those transitional periods from certain cosmic or astrological influences. The Earth, as a living organism and part of the living Sun, is constantly in a different position to other planets and stars. There are many cycles. The beginning of each cycle gives new opportunities and challenges, but also brings dangers. Every morning, every new day is the beginning of the cycle of 24 hours. And every new year is the beginning of a cycle of 365 days, or 366 this year. And day by day and year by year you will meet your own past, and that is, you will face the consequences of your own thoughts and actions. However, there are many more and much longer cycles. There is a so-called Messianic cycle, which is 2,160 years long. We just entered the age of Aquarius. Another instance, there is a cycle of between 10 and 12,000 years. According to Gottfried de Peruca, this long cycle has ended and one of equal period has now begun. We lack time to go deeply into this, but you might imagine that in new time periods there is room for new ideas, and that there will be people who are able to express those new ideas. To be clear, it's not those astrological and cosmic influences that determine the mentality of man, it's opportunities that present themselves, new opportunities, and how we deal with them is up to us. Compare it to a new chief in an office or in a factory. He's implementing new policies, new ideas, and the employees can interpret these ideas selfishly and try to serve their own interests with them. They can also interpret these ideas as opportunities for the totality of the company to function better. No doubt, there will also be people who want to leave everything as it is. They don't like change. They dig their heels in. What is the result? Conflict. And that conflictual situation will be all the greater if people dogmatically stick to their own idea and refuse to consider the ideas of others. Such transitional times also take place wholesale in nations and between nations. Well, after the fall of the Roman Empire, there was a strong dominance of dogmatic religion. Anything that was deviated from the dogmas of the church was forbidden, and people who proclaimed such ideas were cruelly punished. Starting in the 15th century, beginning with the Renaissance in Florence, there was a counter-movement. However, this also led to a dominant materialistic sense in the 19th century, which is actually still largely dominant. And this was accompanied by a realignment of power, decolonization, the rights of other nations to be themselves, the rights of women, etc., etc. New developments occurred, and of course there were people who didn't like any of this and rebelled against it. Well, in times of transition, humanity is more vulnerable than ever to influences from the more selfish layer of the mental sphere. Some will embrace the new thoughts, all new thoughts, even if they have no logical basic whatsoever. Think of the conspiracy thinkers. Others reject all change. It's time of immigration. New people come, come to other countries because there is more prosperity there, or they flee war. In times of transition, there is a kind of regrouping of all kinds of groups, a regrouping of nations and civilizations. One nation loses its leading role in the world, hands it over to another nation or another continent. One religion disappears and another may appear. It is often the crowd spurts of change that causes pain and insecurity. And seeking security, people stick to their own group, their own club of ideas, their country, their religion, and in doing so, they place themselves in opposition to the other, resulting in conflict. And we must be well aware that all this is karmically determined. We have chosen our own friends and enemies in previous lives. And if we have not managed to turn enmity into friendship, we will face each other again in this life, but on a negative base. But karma means free will. No matter how chaotic our world may be, we need not let it influence us. We must learn to live above all parties. The solution is simple. There is one humanity on earth. Our thoughts and action should aim all humanity. After the break, we will develop this hopeful idea and we will try to show you that it is a very realistic idea. But now, the break, ask your questions and we meet each other after 3 minutes. So, see you in 3 minutes. Welcome back. There are some questions.
There are questions, yes. The first question is, young men from Palestine and Israel are forced to fight for their country. In fact, still children. It is inconceivable that young people like to do that. How can they bring about peace in that kind of group karma?
Well, that's not easy, of course. You know, the only solution for every conflict, but especially for the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and the Palestinians, is that they should accept and respect each other. And it's easy to say, but because of so many actions of hatred on both sides, it will take a long, long time to normalize the situation a little bit. But there are some hopeful initiatives. For instance, I think we published a little article in Lucifer, or it will come in the next Lucifer, I'm not sure, but anyway, there's a little village in the north of Israel where the Jews came in 1948 after the terrible World War II. The Arabs, the Palestinians, helped them to settle, to find the source for water, etc. And up till now, they are close friends. They help each other. So it's possible. There is another initiative of parents from Palestinians and Israelis who have lost a child, a son or a daughter, because of the violence of the other party, who understand that the only solution is to accept each other and that revenge never will help. So there are some initiatives, and that's the only way. We have to stop hating each other, and we, as a neutral party, or Europe, we can help them to do that. Not by supporting one group because when you support one group, you don't support the other group. So you have to be above the parties, and then you can offer your help, and you can offer your mediation. Now, if you are a 14-year-old boy and you live in the Gaza Strip, it's a terrible situation, of course, because if you are really forced to fight, well, you have to be very, very strong to refuse it. So that means that we should be very compassionate with all the soldiers on both sides, because they all are in one way or another forced to do it. But there is karma also. I mean, you are not born in a situation like a little boy in the Gaza Strip by coincidence. There is a cause that's probably sought in your last or two lives back, so you have an attraction to the situation. It doesn't mean that you have to accept it, but within the possibilities you may choose for another way of life, and that requires a lot of courage, of course. Now, in the case of a 14-year-old boy, it's almost impossible to oversee the whole thing. But if you are a little bit older, and on both sides, on the Palestinians, among the Palestinians and among the Israelis, you have those people. They are a small minority, but they exist. They refuse to fight, you know. So, and that's the only solution, because by thinking that you can defeat the enemy, no way. It never will lead to anything, because if karma is true, if attraction is built up by hate, well, you meet each other again in this life or in the next life, and the situation will be more difficult. So any thought, any action to change the mentality there, maybe it's a tiny thought, a tiny action, it's still much better than any thought of hate. And that's the only solution. The only solution. If not, it will be worse and worse and worse. And again, we may be able to help them, and I will give in the third part some 5 points that everybody can practice, and that will have those points, if you really practice them, will have their influence on the whole world situation. But that is after the third part of this talk.
Thank you. The next question. You told in your lecture that humanity's function is that we form the mental sphere of the earth. Man is a thinker, but sometimes it seems there is more emotion than rational thinking.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, I don't know who it said, but it's you said it correctly, because rational thinking is a kind of thinking, our intellectual thinking, and most of the time, in many cases, emotions are stronger. But according to Theosophy, emotion is also a kind of thought, an emotional thought. If you do our course, Universal Wisdom, which starts in the end of this month, we will make we will have an exercise to discover the 7 thought principles in man, and you will find out that, at least it's our idea, and you have to control us. Yeah, we said that intellectual thinking, reasoning, is one of the thoughts, of one of the principles of thought, and emotion is another principle of thought. In fact, there are 7, because more noble than intellectual thinking is intuition. You know, you see the interconnectedness, and then the 7th, or the highest way of thinking, we call the sense of unity. You know, there's almost no word to find to express it, but we have many 7 thought principles. And the sadness of our world, indeed, is that instead of reasoning, which we should do, because in our era, in the period of evolution, we call it the 5th root race, the intellect would be stronger, should be stronger than the emotions and the desires. We should have conferences with each other. We should talk with each other, and maybe for days or maybe years, instead of fighting each other. Yeah, that is the time period in which we solve our problems. In the future, even those conferences are not needed, because then we automatically know that the other is a brother of us. The intuition, the interconnectedness, the sense of interconnectedness will grow. We call it the Buddhic part, the Christ part within our consciousness, with our thinking, will be very strong in the future. But nowadays the intellect should be the dominant factor in our consciousness. That is the class of the school in which we are now, but we don't use it, unfortunately. And that's very true, that we are most of the time very emotional, with all the negative consequences.
Well, I think the next person did that course, because the question is, do our intuitive and inspiring thoughts also arise from our constructed thinking atmosphere?
Yes, of course. And we can enforce that part of the mental sphere as well. And that's what we, as Theosophists, try to do. We try to, the thoughts of compassion, of interconnectedness, to show that we really are interconnected, or better, that we are one. That kind of thoughts, that's one of our purposes, the fact that brotherhood is a fact in nature. that kind of things we try to promote, to show that those things are much better to fall back in, you know, the past, the desire and the emotions, the selfish emotions. That's something we should have passed long ago.
Well, we try harder. Last question for this part. I think transitions like the comet phase are the critical points, but also the most interesting. It seems we have to get through this phase. Is that so?
Well, I think that's right. That's right. If we see it in a very big scale, we are in what the Indians called Kali Yuga. That's the black period, the iron period. Everything goes fast. You know, it's much more things happen than in the Satya Yuga, the golden period, or in the silver Yuga, or in the bronze Yuga. But that on one side, that is a fact that problems and trouble and wars, you know, are much easier to evoke than in those more quiet times. But on the other hand, progress, and I mean spiritual progress, progress in understanding, progress in our consciousness, extending our consciousness, is also easier to do because the consequence almost immediately follows the cause. So everything goes quicker and quicker and quicker. And that's why it is a very interesting time, an interesting time for those who really want to grow in their consciousness and grow in their love and compassion towards others.
Thank you, Barend. These were the questions for now.
Okay, thank you. Well, the feeling of helplessness and powerlessness